Hi, I'm Tess from Topstitching Patterns. Welcome to the Penny Shift Dress tutorial. This is my final free pattern in my beginner sewing series. You can find the pattern linked in the description below. If you are new here, this is a 3-part series where we sew a full outfit together using my free patterns. We started with a drawstring bag, then moved on to a sun hat, learning a few new techniques along the way. Today we are finishing with the Penny Shift Dress. This is such an effortless, timeless style. It features a relaxed fit and a flattering V neckline designed for easy, everyday wear. The neckline and armholes are finished with an all-in-one facing and there's no zip. It's a simple slip-on style. The hem is finished with a narrow facing for beautiful shape and structure. Optional inseam pockets can be added and I'll show you exactly how to sew them in, or you can leave them out for an even simpler make. Without the pockets, I'd say this is a very beginner-friendly project. With the pockets, I'd say it's tailored towards a more confident beginner sewer wanting to learn a few new techniques. For this white version, I decided to add waist ties at the side seams for a more defined shape. And since the fabric was a little sheer, I extended the facing to the hem to create a full lining. This is really easy to do. I'll show you how to make the ties and do the pattern adjustment shortly. The pattern comes in sizes 4 to 20 in A4 US letter and A0 printable formats, and there's also a little instruction booklet that includes the size guide, the fabric requirements, and the cutting lay plan. Now, for sewing today's dress, you will need 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch wide non-stretch fusible tape. This is what it looks like here. You can also cut your own strips from interfacing as long as they don't stretch. This is for the V-neck construction and it's really important because it stops the neckline from stretching and gaping when sewing. I will show you exactly how to apply it shortly. And for fabric, I absolutely love linen in this style. I think it gives it a really beautiful natural drape. But of course you can use any light to medium weight woven fabric. If you are using a natural fabric like linen, definitely pre-wash it before cutting to prevent any shrinkage later on. So let's jump into the pattern and cutting. First, print the pattern at 100% scale. There's also a handy size guide included for the sizing. Tape the pages together, then cut out your chosen size. Be sure to clip all of the notches out too, including the ones on the center front and center back fold lines. These notches here indicate the pocket placement if you're adding pockets. For the darts, the drill hole is positioned 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch down from the dart point. Use something sharp like an awl or pin to carefully punch out this hole so it's easy to transfer onto your fabric. Once you've cut your pattern, you should have the front and back with matching hem facings, pocket bags if you're having them, and front and back facings. We'll cut these pieces first. The facings are block fused, so we'll cut those last. If you missed this in the previous tutorials, I'll show you how to block fuse shortly. And if you wanted to alter the facing into a lining, here's how to do it. Skip ahead if you don't need this. First, you'll need some paper. Rule a long line for the center front and tape the front facing down. Lay the front dress on top, aligning the V-neck point. Trace down the side seam and hem. Now, the facing is made slightly smaller at the side seams, so using the pattern, blend this line back out to meet the dress. Double check the side seam length by aligning the dart notches together. My hem needs trimming slightly. Draw in the hem line again if needed. Draw a line 2 centimeters or 3/4 of an inch up from the hem. Then add a notch at 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch to mark the hem allowance. Cut out your front. Do the same for the back. This time align the center back neck point. Blend out that side seam. But before cutting the back out, double check your side seams are the same length. So get your front and walk the side seams down, making sure to exclude the fullness in the dart. Then cut out your back. Because these pieces are technically now lining, you can cross off the block fuse instruction and you'll cut them straight in your lining fabric. First, find a flat surface that has a straight edge to align your selvage to. Lay your fabric right side up with the selvage parallel to your straight edge. Take a moment to make sure the weft, which is the crosswise grain, is sitting as square as possible, and trim it straight if you need to. Fold one edge of the fabric in, making it just wide enough to fit the back pattern piece. Measure at several points to ensure the fold is parallel to the selvage. Pin or weigh down the back pattern piece and the back hem facing. Be sure to transfer all of your notches, including those marked on the fold line, then cut out the pieces. Now fold the remaining selvage edge in for the front hem facing, and optional pockets. You can flip the pattern pieces if needed to make the most efficient use of your fabric. And depending on the width of your fabric, this fold may overlap some of the pieces you've already cut, so just check that your pattern pieces will fit before cutting. Once you're happy with the layout, pin or weigh the pieces down. Mark those notches right on the fold line. Before we cut the front, let's mark the darts while the fabric is still stable and hasn't shifted. Start by clearly marking the dart points and notches. Then use chalk to draw the dart lines, making sure to extend them 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch past the drill hole. This will make the darts easier to sew accurately later on. Place a pin through the dart end to hold it in place before cutting. Once your pieces are cut, transfer the dart through to the other side and mark the remaining dart in. Once everything's cut, I like to mark all of the wrong sides with a bit of chalk so it's clear while sewing. We'll do the block fusing soon. Now let's prep the pieces with the straight fuse tape. Using the pattern as a guide, lay your cut front back on, wrong side up. Adjust it so it matches the V neck exactly. We don't want it stretched out. Mark in the V point with a 6mm or 1/4 inch line. Press the fuse tape to the neckline, ensuring it extends 6mm or a 1/4 inch past the V point. Repeat for the other side. Now I did the same for the back neck, but after sewing this dress, I actually don't think you need to tape this area. It's fine. If you're including pockets, tape the pocket opening, making sure it extends 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch past each notch. I fused this one incorrectly, so let me show you the correct placement of the tape. Because this is a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, the tape shouldn't sit right on the edge, so instead move it in slightly like it is on this pocket bag, so it's centered over the stitching line. So to fix mine, I just added another strip of tape so it's in the correct position. Finally, take a set of pocket bags and apply tape to this edge on the wrong side of the fabric. Again, position the tape slightly in from the edge so it sits directly over the stitching line. And after taping, you'll need to clip your notches again. Now let's move on to block fusing. This simply means fusing a larger piece of fabric first, then cutting your pattern pieces from it. Cut 2 blocks with straight edges, large enough to fit the front and back facings. Place each fabric block onto the fusible interfacing, making sure the wrong side of the fabric is against the glue side of the interfacing. Then cut out the interfacing to match the fabric blocks. Carefully take the fabric and interfacing to the ironing board and be sure to use a press cloth. Gently smooth and straighten both layers so they lie flat without any wrinkles. Use a dry iron, no steam, as steam can interfere with the glue. Press firmly to bond the interfacing to the fabric. Work slowly, ensuring the glue is fully fused and there's no bubbles or areas lifting away from the fabric. Once fused, you can then fold your pieces and cut out the front and back facings. Again, for the front facing, mark the darts in before cutting. And finally, fuse tape the neckline on the front facing using the cut pattern as a guide so it's flat and not stretched out. If you've changed the pattern for lining, no need for the block fused facings, instead cut out your front and back lining. Make sure to fuse the front neckline with the straight tape the same way I showed you earlier. If you'd like to add waist ties, cut 2 strips on the grain line, 40 millimeters or 1.5 inches wide. I cut mine about 70 centimeters or 28 inches long, but you can make them any length you prefer. Now that everything is cut and ready to go, we can start sewing. But a very quick note before we begin, we have reinforced the V neckline, but it is still a really delicate area just because of the angle that it's cut on. So be aware of that when you're sewing and when you're trying the dress on, that you're not pulling and tugging that area because it can distort. This is a sample that I made. It was my very first one, and I didn't use the fuse tape in the neckline. And as you can see on the one side, there is a bit of gaping. So that's what we want to prevent. Let's start with the bust darts. Take your front, fold the dart right sides together. Align your notches, making sure the edges meet and your chalked lines are looking straight. Press and place a pin to hold in place. Do this for all 4 darts. Sew the darts following the chalked line. Now when you get to the end, we don't want to backstitch, so instead run the stitch to the very edge, lift the needle up and pull the thread so you have a tail. Then finish each dart by tying a knot with the loose threads. Do this for all 4 darts. On the front, press the darts up, and on the facings, press the darts down. At this point, if you're having pockets, I recommend overlocking these edges first. I overlocked the side seams together in one of the last steps, and my overlocker struggled to get over the thickness of the pockets. So if you're not including pockets, you'll be fine to overlock later. Now for the ties. Skip ahead if you're not adding them. To turn the ties right side out, you can use a loop turner, or today I'm using a straw and a skewer. This is a really easy method to turn your ties through with just a couple of household items. Fold each tie in half lengthwise and press. Depending on the thickness of your straw, mark how wide you need the tie to be. Sew down the tie. I sewed a little bit and then stopped to check that it was wide enough to fit the straw inside. At one end, pivot and sew across to close it. Trim the seam allowance to reduce bulk. Insert the straw right into the closed end of the tie. Then use the skewer to push the fabric into the straw, turning the tie right side out as you go. Continue until the entire tie is turned. Use the end of the skewer to gently push out the corners, then press the tie flat. The waist tie should be positioned 6.5 centimeters or 2.5 inches below the bust dart. On the front, measure down from the bust dart and mark this point on both side seams. Place each tie at the marked point, aligning the open raw end of the tie with the side seam edge. Pin the ties in place. You can hold the front dress to your body to check you're happy with the placement. Then stay stitch within the seam allowance to hold them securely. The ties will be permanently attached when the side seams are sewn in the later step. Next, we'll attach the inseam pockets. If you're not including pockets, feel free to skip ahead. Take the front body and a set of pocket bags with the fusible tape attached. With right sides together, align a pocket bag to each side seam of the front, making sure the taped edge is facing you. Match the notches carefully, then pin in place. Mark your notches so they are nice and clear and draw in the 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch stitch line. This will be the pocket opening. We're now going to sew the opening, but instead of sewing a sharp square, we will come in at an angle to this point, sew down and then pivot out. This prevents creating a bulky point once turned through. It's really important you sew at exactly 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch. And a little tip, when you reach a corner, you may find that your next stitch would take you past the point where you need to pivot. So if that happens, reduce your stitch length to help you land exactly on the pivot point. Once you've turned the corner, switch your stitch length back to normal and continue sewing. This is what it should look like once sewn. Repeat for the other side. Flip into the corners, being careful not to cut through the stitching. Press the seam allowance towards the pocket bag, then edge stitch close to the seam, starting and stopping at the pocket opening only. Wiggle the side seams out and press. Lay the front piece flat. Place the remaining pocket bags on top of the attached pocket bags with right sides together so the wrong side is facing you. Align the edges, then pin in place. Sew around the pocket bag using a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance, then overlock to finish the edges. Finally, make sure everything's flat and stay stitch the top and bottom of the pocket opening within the seam allowance to hold everything securely in place. I'll show you how to finish these pockets when it comes to the side seams. For now, let's move on to the neckline and the facings. Place the front facing right sides together on the front. Align the shoulder seams and V-point, pin together. With sharp chalk or heat erasable pen, mark in the V. It's a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam allowance. Place a few more pins along the neckline. Repeat for the back, matching the centre back notches and shoulder neck points. And if needed, gently stretch the back neckline to fit the facing. The facing is pattern drafted so the seam will roll to the inside when finished. Sew the V neckline with a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam, careful not to pull and distort it when sewing. Get the needle right into the V point, lift the foot, pivot and sew the remaining side. Then double stitch the V point again to strengthen this area. Sew the back neckline the same method. Next, clip right into that point, careful not to cut into the stitching, and trim back the seam allowance a little on either side. Now press the seam allowance into the facings on the front and back. On the V, edge stitch the facing down to the point on each side. And edge stitch the back neck facing too. Press the front and back necklines flat. You don't need to press the shoulder seams. Open the shoulder facings out so they lie flat. And with right sides together, match the shoulder seams of the front and back facings, making sure the seam aligns as accurately as possible. A little tip, I like to place a pin directly through the seam intersections and then sew a few stitches at that point first to check that everything lines up perfectly before sewing the full seam. Sew the shoulder seams with a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance and press each one open. This is how she's looking now. Next, we're going to use the burrito method to finish the armholes. Lay the dress open with the facing to you. Holding the armhole of the facing, lift it to flick back the armhole of the main dress. Roll the other side like a burrito to get it out of the way. Pin the armhole edges together. Match the side seams, notches, and shoulder seams. Again, I like to sew the shoulder seams first to get them aligned. Sew the armhole with a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam. Turn it through and as much as possible, press the seam allowance into the facing. This is a little tricky, so just do what you can. Next, edge stitch the armhole. On the back, you should be able to sew up to the shoulder seam before you have to stop. However, on the front, you'll only be able to get about 2/3 of the way up before it's too difficult. I managed to sew about 7 centimeters or 2 3/4 inches from the shoulder seam. Now for the last armhole. Reach your hand into the shoulder seam and grab them so right sides are together. And whilst holding them, pull them back so you're turning the armhole partway through. Match the notches and pin. Sew a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam up to the shoulder seam. After that section is sewn, I like to give the armhole seam a little press at this point. Then do the same for the remaining armhole section. Match the notches and pin. Continue stitching with a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam, joining it smoothly to the previous stitching line. Turn the armhole right side out and press the seam allowance towards the facing once again. Transfer the stopping point from the first armhole and then edge stitch the second armhole the same way as before. Give everything a good press. You should find that the seam naturally rolls slightly towards the facing at the shoulder seams, the neckline and the armholes. This is intentional as the facing has been drafted slightly smaller in these areas to help it sit neatly on the inside of the garment and prevent it from rolling to the outside. The dress is really coming together now. It's nearly finished. All that's left to do are the side seams and the hem facings. Open the dress and open the facings out at the side seams. With right sides together, match the front and back side seams, aligning notches and the underarm seams. Quick note, the bust dart should match the back notch like this. The notch doesn't align with the angle of the dart, but with the point where the dart seam meets the seam allowance. So keep that in mind when matching it up. Now, if you didn't add pockets, simply sew the facing and side seam using a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance and overlock the edges. If you have added pockets, here's how we finish the side seam. Skip ahead if you don't need this section. To begin, clearly mark in your pocket opening on the side seams. We're going to sew the side seam with a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, but when we reach the pocket, we'll move the pocket opening out of the way. First, sew a few stitches at the underarm points to match them. This is a little off for me, so I'm going to unpick and do it again. Sew the side seam down to the marked pocket opening. Change your stitch length if you need to get right into that point. Put your needle down, lift the foot, and gently pull the pocket bag out of the way of the stitching line. Put the presser foot down, align your side seam edges, and continue sewing. Once you reach the end of the pocket opening, stop again with your needle down and smooth the pocket back into place. Continue sewing the remainder of the side seam. Once done, you can check the side seam and pocket opening to see how it looks. You can see on mine, my pocket opening has shifted a little, which I'm not happy with, so I'm going to unpick this and sew it again. Okay, that looks better. Now you should have already overlocked these seams like I mentioned earlier, but I didn't, so I'm overlocking these now. My overlocker is not the best, please excuse the stitching. Here you can see how it got caught on the thickness of the pocket. And press the seams towards the back. Turn the dress wrong side out and overlock the hem of the facing. It's circular, so just run off sharply once the edge is finished. Press the underarm and facing area and align the side seams of the dress and the facing so everything sits nice and flat. Open them out and pin the two seam allowances together. Finally, stay stitch a few stitches to secure the facing to the dress. Now for the hem facings. They will look like this. The top edge will be overlocked and the bottom edge with the notches will be a seam. Open them out, place right sides together, making sure the notches are on the bottom edge. Sew one side with a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance and press it open. Overlock the top edge, which is the unnotched edge, to finish it neatly. Then sew the other side seam and press it open. With right sides together, place the facing along the hem edge. Match the center notches and the side seams and pin in place. Sew a 6mm or 1/4 inch seam around the hem. Press the seam allowance into the facing and edge stitch. Fold the facing up and press the hem edge. Make sure the side seams are aligned, then pin them in place. Next, fold the dress in half to find the center points and pin those. And finally, continue pinning around the hem to secure everything evenly. We want to sew the hem within the overlocking. The width is about 1 3/4 inches or 4.5 centimeters. So on your machine, there most likely won't be a guideline, so you can use tape or draw a light pencil line to follow. I'm going to use a magnet seam guide. Starting on the back side seam and right side up, sew the hem, keeping it flat as you sew. Finally, for the white version, finish the lining hem. I used a 7mm double turn hem, or you can simply overlock and turn it up. You can also top stitch the neckline for extra detail, which I think I prefer. If you do, use plenty of pins and keep the fabric flat as you sew. And that's the penny shift dress finished. Give it a press, trim any loose threads, and you're ready to wear it. I hope you're happy with how your dress turned out. This pattern went through quite a few tweaks to get the fit and the construction just right, but it was a really fun one to develop and I'm so happy to share it with you. Seeing your creations and fabric choices is always one of the highlights of releasing a new pattern. So please send me a photo or tag me on Instagram, use the hashtag PennyShiftDress and TestJean Patterns, or you can find me at TestJean on TikTok. And with that, you have completed the beginner sewing series from the drawstring bag to the sun hat and now the penny shift dress. You've made an entire outfit building skills along the way. If you enjoyed the series and you found these tutorials helpful, please like and subscribe. Thank you so much for sewing along. See you in the next one.